Hi everyone and welcome to today's GESS Talks webinar, Opportunities in the GCC Market Intelligence for Education Suppliers. We're excited to have you with us to explore the international schools market in the GCC, a region with 1,785 schools, educating 1.8 million students and generating over $14 billion in annual fee income. Rachel Rogers, the head of sales at ISC Research, is going to lead today's session, providing a data-driven overview of key trends in enrolment, demand, and the growing influence of major school groups. She'll be joined by a panel of experts to discuss procurement priorities, regulatory considerations, and how school groups select and work with suppliers. You should see on the side of your screen a Q&A tab, so please send in your questions throughout the session and the team will try and get to them when they can. So I'm pleased to hand over to our moderator, Rachel. So over to you.
Thanks, Millie. Thanks for that introduction, and welcome everybody who's joining us today, wherever you are in the world. Really looking forward to today's session, looking at opportunities in the GCC region and looking to support suppliers making the most from their visits to events such as GESS Dubai later this year. In today's session, I'm going to give you a brief introduction and overview of the GCC region, looking at the latest data and trends, making sure you have all the information you need to make your event successful this year. And then I'll be coming along with our panelists today, and we'll be discussing their experience and expertise from across the education world to help you gain some insights to support the work that you do with schools around the world. So for those of you who don't know ISC Research, we've been gathering data and intelligence on the international schools market for over 30 years now. So we monitor the market really closely. We're looking for all of those shifts, challenges, good practice happening across the sector, any new developments, and of course, most excitingly, emerging opportunities happening across there. And data is really at the heart of everything we do. So we have a field research team that spend the academic year out visiting international schools, talking to principals and senior leaders, getting not only the quantitative data, some of which I'll be sharing with you today, but getting some real rich, powerful qualitative insights into what's happening across different regions around the world. So we're processing close to 200,000 data points every year, and we have an internal team as well who are spending over 4,500 hours on verification of that data. So you can ensure that everything you see today is clear and support you in the work that you do. Just to give you some clarification on the data that I'm sharing today, we have a specific definition of an international school at ISC Research. So it is a privately operated school that delivers a curriculum either wholly or partly in English medium to some or all of its students between the ages of 3 and 18 years of age in a country where English is not an official language. Exactly the same criteria in countries where English is an official language, but one more criteria to meet is that they're delivering a curriculum other than the host nation's curriculum. So let's have a look and see what's been happening across the world of international schools. We collect a wide range of data, and the data points we collect include information such as school location, ownership, age phases, student enrolment, capacity information, information on student nationality, right the way down to detailed information, for example, on facilities at international schools, as well as the curriculum and examinations that those students are following. Most importantly, as well, for education suppliers, we collect a breadth of contact details of staff right across the school, from principals all the way down to teaching staff within the school. And you can see on the screen here some of those data points showing you the growth in the international schools market over the last 5 years. And by this time next year, we'll be changing our phrase because we're still at the moment, those 5 years, we go back to 2020, where we were just in the heart of obviously COVID and the impact on schools around the world. But you can see that it didn't hold back the sector in terms of growth. So we are now, over those last 5 years, the number of schools has continued to grow. We're up 8%, now at over 15,000 schools, at 15,075 international schools globally, teaching over 7 million students. with staff in those schools, over 730,000 staff now supporting all of those students. And you can see the significant growth in fee income over those last 5 years. So it's grown 27% from 54.7 billion to 69.4 billion. So let's hone in and just have a look at that 5-year growth across the GCC region. So you'll see similar numbers there, although two significant differences to the overall global numbers in terms of the number of schools across the region. Far more schools have opened across the GCC than what we have seen globally. So there's been 11% growth of new schools across that region, going from 1,614 to 1,785, and a real significant growth in the fee income from those international schools. So there's been 32% total fee income growth over those 5 years in the GCC region. So that market alone now is worth $14.4 billion. Let's have a look across the region and see what's happening. So here, if we drill in, you can see breakdown in the region and the number of schools, number of students, and number of staff working in those countries across the region. No surprise to many of you on the call today that the UAE has by far the most number of international schools, students, and staff. And across this market, actually, the UK curriculum is the most popular, most widely offered curriculum across schools in the UAE, currently offered at 51% of schools there. Saudi Arabia has the second most number of schools, slightly lower annual tuition fee point than the UAE, and I'll come on to a couple of details on that in a moment. And if we have a look at Qatar there with 219 schools, they have quite a diverse student population there. So only a quarter of students are Qatari nationals, and they've got students joining from a wide number of areas. So 13% of their student population currently comes from India, 5% from the UK, 4.3% coming across from Egypt, and 2.9% of students are from the US. In contrast to that, if we look at Kuwait and the schools catering there, the majority of their students are from Kuwait. So 55% of that 169,000 students across Kuwait are Kuwaitis. In Oman, half the country's schools are offering the Cambridge curriculum, so very popular curriculum across their 117 schools. And Bahrain, the smallest in terms of the number of schools in the region, with 69 schools, they are predominantly catering to local students. So 63% of their student population are local. Just have a look at the next slide here. So the top 5 revenue markets globally, you can see that 2 of those countries feature in that top 5. So in positions number 2 and number 3. So UAE with a total fee income of 7.7 billion, and then Saudi Arabia at 2.7 billion. So you can see how important that GCC market is to overall global international schools market. So what is driving the market and the sector here? So a number of key areas across the GCC region. There are a whole series of vision projects. Many of you've heard of Vision 2030, 2040 in a number of countries. Alongside these, there is huge infrastructure spending, and obviously this creates job opportunities, not just for local populations, but also for expats moving into those countries, increasing wealth, increasing disposable income, and then many families looking for those better educational opportunities for their children. So that government investment in infrastructure has a real knock-on effect on the international schools market and supports those growth figures that we've seen over the last 5 years. To give you some examples of work that's been happening across the region, in Qatar, Lusail City, which is part of their country's 2030 vision plan and costs around $45 billion. That's expected to become the next financial district in Qatar, and many of the school leaders that we speak to across that region expect this to be the part of the country where you'll see further future growth for schools in Qatar. In Saudi Arabia, there's been substantial developments across the country, including transformation of Riyadh, Red Sea tourism project, and the Knowledge Economic City in Medina, and there are many more projects going on across that region as well. Also in Bahrain, a strategic projects plan includes 22 major projects across the country, and notably projects include the construction of 5 offshore cities, which will increase Bahrain's land area by more than 60%, which is just a phenomenal figure to think about the impact of that across the region. And despite some delays in Kuwait, we're still seeing a large number of key infrastructure projects across there, including the construction of Silk City. And the UAE never surprises me. I'm sure Phil will be able to tell you that ongoing development in the UAE doesn't seem to stop. I think I remember speaking to schools 5-6 years ago, worrying about the number of international schools in there, but there's been such continued influx of people moving into Dubai in the region that there's ongoing continued demand for international schools across there, most definitely. Key to the heart for parents as well, in particular, what's driving, they're looking for an international school. Wellbeing is very much a focal point for schools across GCC and globally, really looking to create those nurturing environments and more holistic approach to students. It's really considered a priority for many parents, to support students with the complex challenges of our modern world. And that very much links with, you see on their AI and technology. And technology is supporting wellbeing as well. Many schools are implementing solutions that can help monitor student wellbeing and offer mental health resources. And of course, wellbeing is not just about the students, it's about the staff as well. So many schools investing significantly to support their staff. And you can see on there, I'll come on in a moment, around staff retention and recruitment. So 50% of schools we speak to are including wellbeing for teachers in their up and coming CPD plans. So AI and AR still most definitely, and AI are key buzzwords in the sector, and many of your suppliers will be incorporating these into your solutions. And schools are implementing them, whether that's looking at admin tasks, saving time for their teachers, or seeing how you can really personalise learning for students as well. The implementation of that we're just beginning to see. Some schools are far more cautious, obviously, and they're looking at their ethics policies and thinking about how they implement that, but certainly there's some really exciting work going on in that sector. And then finally, coming on to staff retention. So with that significant growth that you've seen there in schools, not just across the GCC, but worldwide, schools are placing real importance on retention and recruitment of staff. And indeed, we have been conducting some additional research into salaries and benefits at ISC over the last year, and that report is due for publication in a couple of months' time. I know whenever I speak to a school principal, it's always one of the top 3 areas that they are thinking about and concerned with. And just looking quickly on school groups across the GCC region. So globally, 38% of international schools are part of an international school group, but you can see that number jumps up significantly across the GCC, and 47% of schools in this region are part of an international school group. And on the screen there, you'll see some top 5 groups from across that region. GEMS in the top position there, including some early stages, nursery ones in there, Chubby Cheeks Nursery, Aldar Education, and there are other key significant groups across the region as well, the likes of Talim, Bloom and Innoventures across there as well. So hopefully that's given you a bit more of an insight in what's happening across that region. I'd like to now introduce you to my panel, have significant experience as well from those international school groups. Can I come to you first, Phil, to just introduce yourself today?
Thanks, Rachel. Fascinating as always to see those updated numbers, and we all rely heavily on ISC data, so it's always a great place to start and get a handle on what's going on. Even if you're in the region, it's essential to have that background, that high level view. My name's Phil Redhead. I've been in the region here for 21 years now, originally from the UK. I've worked as a teacher and a senior leader in schools, also strategically across GEMS education for 11 years, a long time. Part of that was as group head of education technology and digital learning, digital strategy for GEMS Group. Spent some time in the Saudi public sector as well on digital education strategy and EdTech across the 25,000 public schools there. Also led the Deloitte Middle East EdTech practice based out of Dubai, but with work across the region, and have spent the last sort of 4 years in a consultancy role, now with EdV, bringing that sort of expertise and education experience across those 25 years across my career, but also with partners and a great team. So bringing that commercial angle as well as the technology expertise, bringing that around the education to provide that 360-degree support and service to EdTech companies and other suppliers into the education space. So I'm the education partner in EdV now, supporting international growth for suppliers in the region and beyond.
That's lovely. Thanks, Phil. Quite an extensive experience there that I'm sure will be providing a huge amount of insight today. And Dan, do you just want to share your background with us as well, please?
Yeah, of course. I can't compete with that extensive amount of experience, Phil. So it's it's really interesting to hear your background. And Rachel, just want to say the findings, as Phil said, are absolutely fascinating. I think, particularly around some of the market growth trends that you were talking about, it's a good sense check for us actually to make sure we're focusing on the right things as well. So I'm Dan Williams. I'm the head of lab schools here at ISP. What that means is we're about 120 schools globally now. But we use 11 what we call lab schools as the sort of evidence-based, the test bed for any new educational technology that we want to bring in, and also for our own in-house AI toolbox that we've developed. And they're diverse in every sense of the word, right? So they're diverse in terms of attitudes towards educational technology, whether it's parents, whether it's teachers, students, diverse in terms of availability of hardware, diverse in terms of what the focus is from each school in terms of the ISP pillars, so whether it's life competencies, academic achievement, multilingualism, the idea being that whatever we test at those 11 lab schools and pilot over a year should in theory work for the majority, if not the entire rest of the ISP group as well. And then prior to that, I've worked in educational technology for 4 years before that, mainly in higher education. So I worked with the likes of Harvard, University of Oxford, Monash University in Australia, kind of dealt with that globally. It's really been interesting in my first year, moving a little bit earlier along the pipeline in education, going from higher ed, taking some of what I've learned from that and bringing it into K-12 as well. But yeah, really glad to be here.
Brilliant. Thank you both for joining us today on this panel session. I think really looking forward to getting into some of the insights and sharing those with everybody who's joined us today. If anybody does have a question as we go through the session today, you'll see the chat function on the screen. Do feel free to add questions into there. I'll either pick them up as we're going through, or we'll save some time towards the end of the conversation to address those questions as they come through. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rachel Rogers, Head of Sales at ISC Research. Worked in the international sector for over 5-6 years now, prior to ISC, leading a team of consultants selling to schools around the world, and then prior to that working in EdTech across the UK for 20 years plus. I'm allowed to round up when I get to a certain number as a lady. So without further ado, let's start thinking about, obviously with GESS coming up in November, it's not that far away. And can I come to you, Phil, to talk about what would your recommendations be? You work with a wide variety of suppliers. What do they really need to think about in terms of preparing before attending a session such as GESS to make sure they get a really strong ROI from these events?
Okay, so I always say it very much depends on the stage the organisation is at and what you're providing and where you are in terms of your journey. But I think it's really important to frame an event within a wider strategy for internationalization and growth. So when we're talking about strategy, we're looking at the real high level work, which a lot of companies seem to miss out. It can look very sporadic, especially with early stage companies coming out to test the water, and that's fine. But I think it's really important to have that overall strategy and spend some time on how the event fits in, because if you don't do that, you end up not getting the ROI and then blaming the event and saying that was a waste of money. But actually, most of these events are really, really powerful, and I think you have to be here. But it's only successful if you frame it within that strategy. So when we're talking about strategy, it is around the vision, the mission, and that's overall as well as within region. And then the arenas where you're going to win and how you're going to win, the differentiators against so have you done the competitor analysis, the pace at which you think you can move before the event, beyond the event, and the overall long-term strategy for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, what resourcing that will require. And again, it's fine to come and test the water. If that's your expectation of the outcome of the event, come to learn, come to listen to people, come to find out, then your ROI is actually in the data and the learning that you take back. And if that's used to inform the strategy, then that's fine. But I think if you're coming with the expectation of commercial ROI, especially at an early stage, then I think you have to manage those expectations, and you have to sort of increase your chances of winning in that sense, because it doesn't just happen off the back of one event. You will get lots of leads. GESS in particular are very good at helping companies to generate leads, but it's about the wraparound services. So I think that's the starting point. Create a strategy, be very aware of what you're doing beyond the event and where the event sits, where it's framed within that strategy. But I would also be asking the event providers, what wraparound services and value add is there beyond the hours that we spend on the floor? So are there workshops? Are there other events going on around the event? Are there school visits? What's being done to support us pre-event, post-event, and ongoing in the period before the next event? So is it a 365 day a year service, or is it just that one event? Because very little happens from one event. So I think establishing that strategy, asking those questions, and making the most of your time here. I mean, I can say more about what happens during the event and how to maximize that time on the floor, but treating it as a sort of, a longer term visit, arranging school visits before and after, reaching out to intended targets before you come to guarantee those meetings as well. And GESS will help with that. And that's part of the strategy, knowing where you're going to win and who you want to win with, and doing that research. Obviously, engaging a local partner to help with that can help as well. And just to finish that off, I think it always comes down. It's a really complex business, building sustainable relationships. We all know that, but it comes down to 3 key areas, which we always talk about at EdV, which is relevance, relationships, and resilience. So what's the relevance of your product and your service, right? And there's a lot of work to be done on that. Does this really fit? And again, if you're coming just to find that out, fantastic. And you find that out by listening. Then there's the relationships. You don't build a relationship in a 3-day event or a 1-day event. That has to be part of the overall strategy. How are you going to do that before, during, and after? So what does that look like? And then the resilience is very much around the resourcing. Have I got 6 months runway to make something work in the Middle East? If you have, probably don't bother, right? Am I going to put people in? Am I going to engage a local partner? What's my resilience strategy commercially and resourcing wise to make this work in the long term? So that's kind of an overview of what I would be looking at before the event.
Yeah, I think you bring up some really key points there, don't you? It's not just about that one event. You've really got to think about the before event, maximising your time in region, in a country, at an event, and then that post event and the follow up. And it really does take time to build those relationships with international schools. You touched on a few points there, Phil. I'd just like to delve into a little bit more about where have you seen this being really, really successful? And contrary to that, examples where, common mistakes or pitfalls that suppliers really should be aware of it and try and avoid.
Okay. I mean, pitfalls are not listening. coming to sell rather than to listen and learn, because in establishing that relevance of product and creating the relationships, you have to really listen to the schools and the stakeholders and learn what where your product fits and where you're going to win, because that informs the strategy. So we see a lot of exhibitors they'll be on the stand and they wait for people to come to them, and it's not effective. It's luck's not a strategy. So people walking past, even with the best stand in the world, if you've got coffee, if you've got gimmicks, if you've got robots walking around, it doesn't really work. You've got to get out there, so looking at providing talks as well, showing that you have something to contribute beyond the product in terms of thought leadership, attending the talks. So it's an important part. I would never just be sending one or even two people. If you can manage it, if you can fund it, you should have more than one or two people on the stand. You should have people trawling the talks, finding out, because that's where you learn. When I was in post, obviously I was privileged. We didn't need to exhibit. I was a buyer for many years, but I wouldn't spend time walking around the stands. I'd have a cursory look around to see, and I already knew what I was looking for. Those once or twice there'd be a surprise, but the learning comes from the talks a lot of the time. So if you're giving one of those talks, if you're presenting thought leadership, not necessarily promoting the product, but you establish yourself as a thought leader with the credibility to talk on educators' terms and to address the problems that they're trying to solve themselves, then that gets So successful companies do that very, very well. They have people in the company who are known and associated with the product, which kind of helps to sell itself. So and the other thing, the other successes, I'm loath to name names because people feel left out, but I can think of a number of products and services where they do have this long-term strategy, and the event is part of that, and they're there every year, and they don't expect to pick up new business from that, but it's touching base with customers, clients, it's learning, it's carrying on that learning, it's building the sustained relationship. So it's critical to do that. But the thought leadership is really important. Getting out and about. The worst thing you can do is just stand on the stand. Walk the floor, talk to other suppliers, learn, and then bring that back into the conversations. And when people do approach your stand, ask them what they're trying to solve, ask them why they've come to your stand, what are they looking for, and try to find the need behind the need. Because I had an interesting conversation recently where a director of education came to me and asked for they said they wanted an XR solution for science, but actually talking to them and getting to the need behind the need, they didn't need technology at all. What they really needed was CPD to make their science teachers better. And when we talked through, it was a completely different solution. That saves everyone the headache. It saves the pain on the school side and the pain on the supplier side as well. So short answer, I know it's not very specific, but companies do well if they're seeing the event as part of a longer term strategy and being proactive and getting out there and establishing credibility among the community, getting into schools, giving talks, providing thought leadership, getting on panels, ingratiating themselves with principals and buyers on panels. So sharing the stage with someone who already has that credibility can be really powerful. Someone like Dan, for example, I don't want to put Dan on the spot. If you can get on a panel or a stage with Dan, then that gives you the instant credibility. Somebody who's prepared to share a stage with someone representing your service or company.
Absolutely, and I know you kind of just reminded me there when I was leading teams selling internationally, two of the key things I was always talking about would be curiosity and credibility. And curiosity is about asking those questions and getting a real understanding of the schools you're talking to. So, you can then position the best solution for their needs and making sure you thoroughly understand their needs. And that, again, as you mentioned there, just visiting the sessions at a conference, such an important element, because that really builds your credibility then in terms of, rather than just standing next to someone at the coffee queue during breaks, say, how are you finding the show? You can ask a really pertinent question, if you've just come out of a session, or what did you think about, what they were talking about there?
Yeah.
And then you really start those, building those relationships and getting those engaging conversations.
And going back very quickly to what we were saying earlier around the other events, the wraparound events, that's where relationships really start. The social events, the workshops, the side events that are happening throughout the week, really important to getting involved in those as well.
Yeah, and from an attendee's perspective, Dan, as well, does that resonate with you? How do you find, when you're attending events such as GESS, interacting with suppliers, exhibiting or attending there?
I found myself wanting to jump in on numerous occasions with Phil, but also not want to interrupt him mid-flow and let him carry on, because I think there's some really pertinent stuff in there. I think, Phil, you talked a bit about, when you're in a position as a buyer. Totally right. When Rachel, before the call, we were chatting about BET back in January. I don't think I saw a single talk at BET this year, and I was there for the entire thing. It was literally just going from meeting to meeting with suppliers who had put that time in well in advance, which I think is really important. The point around listening is so important as well. I mean, I would imagine if you're joining this webinar, it shows that you're probably of that mind anyway to go and listen to suppliers. But the bit that I really wanted to pick up on was, Phil, you were talking about most buyers will have very specific needs in mind. So we have that, right? Our EdTech strategy is underpinned by problem statements that we have for each of our 5 pillars, right? So it could be something like better integration of our life competencies pillar within the classroom. So we have very specific purposes that we're looking to work with suppliers for. And what's also key, you mentioned about the VR or the XR solution, Phil, is that we don't see EdTech as the vehicle for anything. It's the enabler of other elements of our strategy. So I think that's really important. I think the bit around relevance as well, when you talked about the 3 R's, really, really key. So think about those problem statements, or ask us what our problem statements are, ask us what we're trying to achieve with EdTech. And it doesn't matter if you only partially meet those problem statements, because then you need to be thinking about where you don't meet them and what's on your roadmap, what's on your strategy long term to make sure that you do cover those off if you see those as being important as well. So for instance, I'm actually meeting a supplier today who they provide us with a solution. It is all based around Common Core curriculum, so nothing built around British curriculum. A number of our British curriculum schools in the UAE have been using it. It's not a killer yes, no, or you don't do British curriculum, you're out. But they do have a plan on their roadmap to develop that. And importantly, the other great thing about working with a large international schools group is that you, whether it's ISP, whether it's GEMS, whoever it is, as a supplier, you get a huge research base to work with as well. So think about that. Think about how you get some value out of it, not just transactionally, right? But in terms of that partnership, it is a true partnership. We work with our suppliers to use this as a bit of a research base for their own product development as well. I think just think about that two-way sort of relationship rather than just what you can give to us as well, if that makes sense.
No, I think that's a really important point, isn't it? Because, it's about the long term. It's about building relationships with those schools, with those school groups, and really understanding where your solution fits now, where it could fit, what are the needs of the schools that you're talking to, and how can you work with them and support them and help them. Does the procurement process differ if you are selling to an individual international school compared to a school group? Can I come to you first on that, Dan?
Yeah, I've got to be careful what I say, because I think our procurement team get quite frustrated with me sometimes. It's obviously different with us because we use the so we do go through the usual procurement process, right? But ours is a bit more because we go through that piloting phase with the lab schools. It's not per se procurement straight away. The procurement actually happens once the pilot's finished. I guess with us, it is quite useful that we have that central EdTech team, which not all schools groups have. So we do procure centrally. So as I say, the main thing for us that we think about procuring when we procure centrally is how is this going to work for the majority of our schools group? Because if it's not, we'll procure it on a regional basis or in a specific school. If it is, then we have to think about how that fits. So for me, when we're looking at central procurement of anything, I really have to think about where the gaps are in an existing tool. And if there are gaps, where are they in the roadmap? Is it something we can address after 6 months? Is it something we can address after 2 years? Particularly around challenges of curriculum, because we have 35 different curricula. Languages is another big piece. So our main ones are English, Spanish, Portuguese. We've got a lot of schools in Brazil as well. So it's thinking about that. But again, it always helps us if a supplier can come to us and say they've already thought about it. That's always quite nice. I think the really important thing with that is I don't want to make it. I think there's a tendency to think if we're looking at something that works for every region, that we only work with some of the larger EdTech suppliers, but we absolutely don't. So one of the suppliers we work with on that life competency challenge that I talked about before is a company called The Edge. So we work with them, very new. It's a product that's been going since January this year. And I think it's a team of about 10 people. So that doesn't rule things out. But as I say, with them, they've thought about that long-term strategy rather than just this is a one-off sale to a large schools group.
Yeah, I think you highlight a really important point there, Dan, in terms of it's not a one size fits all, is it, with international school groups? You clearly articulated there, it could be a solution for the whole group, it could be for a region, or it could be something for an individual school to meet their needs. Does that resonate with you, Phil, with your experience?
It does, yeah. Even within groups or within schools, you have different stakeholders. So depending on ISP are really well organised in terms of the EdTech and the group purchases and so on. And like Dan says, that's not the same everywhere, even though it might look like it from the outside. So depending on what you're bringing to the organisation, there'll be different key stakeholders and decision makers. It's not necessarily the person who looks like they're at the top. It could be a teacher, it could be a year leader, it could be a principal, or it might be a director of education or an inclusion lead. You have, and I think one thing we work with our clients on is getting better at being direct and asking the question everywhere they go. What's the process? Because and I think buyers appreciate that because it saves everyone time. If we're going to succeed here, let's establish that we can solve your problem. Let's establish who the problem really matters to the most. Are they the decision maker? If not, what process do we have to go through? And we work with our clients on actually constructing these stakeholder maps. It doesn't take long if you already have that intelligence around the target company or school, but you have to know who you're dealing with and who it really matters to, who's going to push this through. There's always an internal sell to be done at some level on every project. And I've done a lot of that internal selling over the years, and it's really tricky, but it comes down to knowing, creating that business case and selling it to the right person for the right reason. And I've always found that cost, within reason, obviously, cost is not the issue. It's around the value. Is this really valuable to a certain person who has positional power in the organization? And is it solving a real problem for them in terms of what they have to deliver for the organization? In essence, and not wanting to dumb it down a little, are you making them look good? Mm-hmm. Are you helping them to perform their role and succeed? Because that generally works quite well. Yeah. And everyone's winning, and especially the students and the teachers, right? Because that person, generally 99 times out of 100, the people in the positions of power who are making the decisions, or at least making the business case, they know what they're doing. They really do, and they know what they want and how to do it. So if you can make them succeed, then everyone wins.
Yeah, I think, can I just come in there as well?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, I think it's Phil, you made a really good point there, which is that I'd say about 30% of the suppliers that we work with from an EdTech perspective didn't come directly to me. They came through a teacher in one of our schools who recommended it, but presented the value of it. That's the main thing, right? I think, particularly within schools, and part of the change that we've had to instigate is they just think about engagement. Engagement data is what they sort of start and end with a lot of the time. I think we're getting better with it, but that's still sort of the approach sometimes, where it is about that tangible value. That's why the pilots exist, why we do them. But even before the pilots, if we can have a think about what the intended impact is and what we anticipate the impact is, that solves the argument for us around costs, as you say, Phil, because it's set money aside to experiment, to pilot. We know what the intended impact is. If it doesn't have the desired impact, then we don't move past pilot. But if it does, it becomes much easier to have a conversation around budget and sign off with our procurement team.
Yeah, and I agree with that. It's a really good point, Dan. And I think, in terms of being on the floor at somewhere like GESS, you have great conversations with teachers, and everyone will say, "I love this. This is fantastic." But we see companies tend to pick up on that. We're a positive species generally, and we cling on to the positives, right? Which is why pipelines tend to be overinflated everywhere you go, because you think, great, one person loves it, so the sale is done. I think it helps everyone to ask that teacher, the person who loves it, what's your position in the organisation? What's the process? If you have to go to someone like Dan, let's set that up quickly. Dan appreciates that from what he said, because it saves him time. And it saves the teacher time as well. So all the way through, if you can streamline that process by getting to the right people with the right messaging, you'll get the answer, whether it's positive or negative. But getting that answer quickly is really important. And the pilots feed into that as well, right?
Yeah, and so if teachers come to you, Dan, and they've seen something at a show and they think it's a good solution for them, what's the process you go through then in terms of that initial piece of information, and which suppliers would you then move forward with to potentially a pilot phase? How does that journey go?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a very good question, actually. I think what the first thing we try and do is map it against those problem statements that I just talked about. So we look straight for those. But things can often look very different on paper to what they look like in reality. So if it comes through our schools, particularly our lab schools, and we have ed tech leads in each school responsible for implementation, then we'll move straight to demo phase. I'll always see a product. Worst case scenario is that it's an hour of my time gone. That's all it is. So we'll always move straight through to demo, and that would be with the ed tech team. Then after that, it would be a follow-up discussion with any of our functional heads that we need to bring in. So I think really crucially with our EdTech team, it's not a partnerships team, it sits within our learning function. So we sit alongside the heads of multilingualism, the heads of life competencies, future pathways. So we bring them straight into that conversation as well and say, is this a product that helps you meet any of the kind of key targets that you have within your pillar for the schools as well? And then if it gets past that, it's just a two-stage process. We'll move straight through to piloting and looking at which schools we can do it in, which year groups, how many students, and we'll take it from there. And as I say, most of our pilots now we're running at about 6 months. A full academic year, if it's something that's strongly aligned to academic achievement, just to make sure that we allow it a large enough time frame to see kind of the fruits of our labour. But that's the way it is. So we try and keep it as simple as possible, because we have to be agile as a team, such that if we see a product that we really like, we can move through to piloting quite quickly.
And would you be piloting on one solution, or would you look at other solutions or multiple pilots going on at one time? Multiple,
I think. So across the 11 lab schools in the academic year just gone, I know a lot of our schools have run sort of March through to December as well, but for most of them it's obviously starts September onwards. We ran, I think it was about 72 different pilots across the schools of different tools. So we run them alongside each other. But it's why setting up the foundations of what we really want to see is so important. because naturally we're a team of 3 in EdTech. We can't be assembling the aeroplane as we take off. We kind of have to have it there ready to go before then.
And have you seen a successful example? I'll come to you in this one, Phil. A successful example of where a supplier has worked with maybe 1 or 2 schools in a group and then broadened out to other schools. So maybe school groups that don't have the extensive infrastructure that Dan has for procurement, and they've kind of grown it piecemeal across a school group.
Yeah, and it's a really important approach, Rachel, like you say, especially when that structure is not necessarily there. But even when it is, it's good to have that support from the ground up as well as top down. So we talk about this pincer movement at EdV, keeping the top warm, so there's no surprises. There should be no ambushes in meetings and procurement meetings. So everyone should be on board by the time you get to that sort of commercial sell stage. So getting that internal advocacy at the ground level is really important. So 1 or 2 schools in a large group of 20 to 30, finding out, it comes down to stakeholder analysis as well. Who are the key people? Get the advocacy where you can, grow that out to the next stage, talk to the people. Who else would be interested in this? Can you find areas of commonality in terms of the problem statements like Dan talks about? Is it across the group? Are there similar schools in the group who are trying to solve similar problems? It might be curriculum based. It might be market based in terms of the fee point, the demographic of the students and the families. They all have different problems, but there might be commonalities as well. So getting that success, establishing the early success, proving the impact, establishing the advocacy, because it's good for those teachers as well. Teachers in schools creating more value for the organization helps them make a name for themselves as well. It helps their career. So teachers they tend to be keen to take this on, right, and do something positive. That they want to do better for their kids. They want to progress their own careers. It's good for the school to lead on an initiative that is adding value to the group. And then it's just about that upward sell across the organization. I mean, I saw an amazing example when I was a buyer back in the GEMS days of a product that started exactly like that, just with 1 or 2 schools. And I was one of the buyers, the first buyers. And then it ended up in pretty much every GEMS school across the group. It was never a central purchase, but it was within a framework agreement at a reduced price, because what tends to happen is if you get into 5, 10, 15 schools, then someone at the top takes notice and says, actually, every school's paying too much for this. And we have it in more schools at a better price, and that's a no-brainer once you're at that stage.
That's the dream. I mean, we have it with some pilots where you can't stop it once it starts, essentially. So to your point, Phil, we start some pilots. I think there was one that we started in 9 schools, and now we've got 30 of our schools using it, and we've only just procured it centrally as well. So it kind of grew out of that very, very quickly. But advocacy is so important, right? We always talk about how it's, I said I'm not from a sort of technical background. Our EdTech implementation it's a change management process, right? It's a horrible, boring clinical term, but it's totally true. It's people first. It's sort of technology second. And that advocacy is so important. We don't have an EdTech lead in all schools. We have them in our lab schools, not in all schools. So actually building that natural advocacy for a product as soon as we possibly can amongst teachers is so important, just to make them feel like they're bought into it as well, I think.
Yeah.
And I would just say the bottom-up sell is often a lot easier than the top-down sell.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of technology deployed across a group without coming from the bottom, and because there's not that buy-in, it fails, and it's very expensive.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to what you said at the start of the session, Phil, in terms of thinking about attending events such as GESS, and it's that longer term relationship building. I think when you're looking to sell into a school group in particular, you do need, it's always a long-term sell most of the time, whether that's from the top down or the bottom up. You've really got to think of that as a long-term relationship and partnership with that organisation that you're looking to work with. You touched on there as well about some of the payment areas. Are there any kind of payment terms, contractual expectations that are common when working with international schools or international school groups that suppliers should be aware of? I'm going to come back to you first on that one, Phil.
Yeah, again, I would say it differs across schools and groups. That everyone will have their stated processes, but what I would say is where there's value, there's flexibility. There's always budget if the solution's right, and if the relevance and the zeitgeist is there, if there's an imminent need, there's always budget, and there's always the possibility. So the general sales cycle is fairly set in the region. I would say around, as a general rule, you've got sort of the first term to create the relationships, to create awareness, to start pilots, that sort of thing. The budget decisions tend to be made between February and April, and then you've got your sort of preparation, your implementation, onboarding the following September. But where there's real value, if you can nail that relevance, and like Dan talks about solving that problem statement, then I think in most places you'll find more flexibility, because it's finding that person, like I said, who it really adds value for in solving that problem. It makes their internal business case sell much easier, and that is less time dependent.
Would you concur with that, Dan?
Yeah, I do. It's a bit different for us because obviously procuring essentially, I mean, our budget year runs from September, and nothing's ever perfect for us either, right? We always get complaints from one of our schools globally that our rollouts don't align to their timetable. That's just the nature of it. I think where I can probably lend a bit more, and Phil's experience at GEMS is really relevant to this as well, is probably some of the things that larger schools groups probably typically like to ask for just to test the water. Phil made the point about being flexible. They're all very flexible, but you will inevitably get the questions from some of the larger groups around exclusivity, best available pricing, all that kind of stuff. And it's tricky. It's tricky for a supplier to know where to go with it, really, I would say. So I'd just say be very clear with any of the schools that you work with, group or not, that they do see it as a partnership, and that you're not actually narrowing your own market by working with an ISP or a GEMS. I think that's changing now, but it's so important. It's very tempting to go, this is a massive schools group, I'm going to take that deal, and yeah, I'm not going to work with anyone else. But I'd say if you've really got faith in your product, just think about it very carefully, is what I would say. Yeah. Not a warning, just trying to be really transparent over that's what happens, because schools groups always think about the marketing around it as well. They can put out there in the ether, so it's just the reality of it.
Yeah, that links quite nicely actually with one of the questions that has come in from the audience today. Talking about, what are the main points of competition between schools within the region? So obviously lots of different schools. We've seen that phenomenal growth, in particular across the UAE. It is a competitive market for students. What's your experience of that you're seeing? Can I come to you first on that, Phil?
That's a good question. And again, Dan's been really clear. ISP are very clear on what they're trying to achieve with their problem statements. Not all groups are there. It's a little bit more sort of messy and woolly, but every school and every group is trying to establish a USP, especially with that phenomenal growth you outlined at the start, Rachel. You have to have something different you're offering when you come into the market. And even for established schools, they have to sustain what they're known for. So being very clear about what each school and group is trying to achieve and what they stand for will help you to establish the relevance of your product. And having that early conversation with those schools and with the key stakeholders is really fruitful in terms of being able to target your energies in the right place and speaking to the right people where you're more likely to win. And that becomes part of that. That's part of the strategy, thinking about where we will win, where the arenas are. It might be that your product is really well suited to the low-cost American curriculum school market, whereas it's really not a good fit for IB. or it could be around specific curricula rather than market segment and price. It could be, you've got places like Bloom World Academy and others who are set up on the premise of high level personalized learning, starting the school at different times and things like that. So if you've got a solution that lends itself to personalized learning I was talking to a vendor this morning. We've got a fantastic kind of extracurricular offering around real world learning. There are schools who will go for that, and there are schools who are actually just trying to get the exam results and sustain that. Okay, so finding out which schools fit your product and vice versa is really, really key to that, I'd say. But it's the USP, finding out what they really care about and getting beneath that and seeing if the actual statements match the reality. Because you will get schools who are saying, we care about XYZ well-being, skills and so on. But when it comes to the crunch, they won't sign off because what they really need to do is get their exam results up.
Yeah, so making sure you're aligned with their actual drivers and values there. Another really interesting question's coming in. I want to come to you on this one, Dan. Just checking. So the question is about checking legalities of working as a supplier to international schools or groups. Are there things that people need to consider before they start selling into international schools?
It's a really good question, actually. I would say a lot of this comes down more sort of regionally. I'd say the big differences that we see in terms of legalities are region to region. It's not really something that we've encountered too much, if I'm being totally honest. So yeah, I think about that. I'd also think, I read that person was a wellbeing coach as well. I think about what some of the different aspects of focus are in terms of well-being from region to region as well for us would be another thing. So yeah, nothing really in terms of legalities though.
Do you see that, Phil, with like working with different companies across different regions, areas of compliance that they might need to be aware of, or getting onto frameworks to supply certain schools?
Yeah, again, it depends on the product. So if I was coming in as a well-being coach, it often comes down to the business license that you have and localizing that as well. So especially something that can have such a direct impact on student well-being or any kind of human well-being, it's just worth checking with the authorities, checking with KHDA, the ministry, ADEC and so on, is if something goes wrong, am I covered for this in terms of the business license? Because they're quite strict on what you can deliver. With something like that as well, you should have business insurance in case anything goes wrong as well. But it depends. If you're selling software in remotely, that tends to be less problematic. If you're on the ground running events or taking part in events, teacher training, giving any kind of certification, there are many regulations around that. They're not insurmountable, but you just need to know where to go to make sure you're covered off and everyone's safe and you've got those guardrails in place.
Yeah, I think you picked up there as well on the regulators across the UAE, and I think certainly for suppliers coming out to work in that region, being aware of what the regulators require from the international schools across that territory, what's high on the agenda, what are they looking to achieve, because obviously that's what international schools will have to, whether it's meeting requirements or suggestions there, and how does your solution fit in with what's going on across a particular region. We've got a couple more minutes. If there's any more questions, do drop them into the chat panel. One more question on there is around, we spoke about earlier, getting onto panels at events. So any strategies on how to get onto a panel? Phil, do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, it's about knowing people, right? So I would be GESS, obviously, I would be talking to the GESS organisers and ask the question directly, how do I get onto a panel? And direct that around the relevance, who you want to be on a panel with and why. Do you already have a relationship with a school, with someone who has that credibility in the region? Obviously, EdV can help with that. We're sitting on panels all the time. We're at various events and we run our own events as well. So, we can help get get people on the relevant panels and focus that really well. But really, it's about leveraging those existing relationships and creating new ones. So start with everyone knows someone, and then go through the degrees of separation. I mean, you all know Dan now, right? So I don't want to put him on the spot, but what a great person to be on a panel with.
I feel for my LinkedIn inbox now. No, it's I think it's a really good point, isn't it? It's not so much can I get on a panel, it's establishing that relationship beforehand. I would say most of the panels that I do at the minute actually are telling the sort of story of the EdTech strategy at ISP and lab schools. So naturally, a lot of the other panelists are suppliers that we work with. So that's part of it, but it's not the be all and end all. I would say establishing a relationship with someone that you typically see on these panel discussions is quite a good way to go, because then naturally they'll think about you for other subjects. I think actually the first ISC one I was on, someone else put me forward because they couldn't do it. I think it was my boss. And then naturally now Rachel thought of me for this one.
And that was it then, yeah. You can't escape me then, Dan.
It happens because you naturally think about this is the subject area of this panel. I know someone who might be relevant for this. So it is,
isn't it? Yeah. It's about those relationships. And I think, if your product and solution is on a particular area, becoming an expert, sharing that expertise and that knowledge that you have on that particular solution will get you invitations along to panels. But it's about networking, exactly as you're both saying, connecting and building those relationships, and not just with the schools, across the wider industry as well. I'm just going to pick up one last question in the chat and see if anybody knows. Can't guarantee we'll have an answer on this one. Around the VR business over the next 3 years, main suppliers of VR across GCC region. Are either of you familiar or aware of what's happening with VR across the region? Going to come to you, Dan. Are you using it much across your schools?
We're actually not at the minute. So we haven't piloted anything in VR at the minute. It's I think the reason why it's been quite carefully done strategically. So before I was at ISP, when we surveyed all of our schools, I think they were using over 1,000 different edtech or sort of semi-edtech platforms with very sort of little measurement of impact. So actually the original strategy was quite a stripped back approach of let's not get into anything that feels too new age. Let's just focus on very simple technology that we know adds impact. So there's nothing that we do around VR currently, but it is something that we're looking at. Individual schools do, but there's nothing that we do with it at the minute.
Have you seen much use across the region, Phil? Are you working with VR suppliers at all? No?
Yeah, so we are. We've seen it's really around how the school deploys and utilizes to get the highest ROI. I think there's a general feeling, which is probably a little bit unfair, that there's low ROI in terms of learning, because you tend to have a lab or some kind of space where kit gathers dust and kids go once a year, it's not the fault of the company or the kit or the product. It's around the customer success and the support around the pedagogy and the curriculum design. So, companies like Class VR are still prevalent. You'll see that in lots of schools. We're working with, we've been talking to a company that I met at GESS Saudi actually earlier this year called VR, which I'm really, really keen on. They seem to have very, very high level, high impact content, which is great, and it's affordable. But again, it's really around the partnership, the relationship with the school, to make sure the school gets the best out of that. Otherwise, it just becomes another bit of STEM kit or technology that sits gathering dust, which is criminal and unforgivable. And it's not about the kit. The kit's mostly pretty good. The content's usually pretty good and worthwhile. It's about how you build it into the curriculum and how you use it. And that gives you the ROI, and that gives you more sales and more business and more impact, and helps you build relationships.
Well, I'm just conscious of time, so just one final piece of advice from you both to give to suppliers who have joined us today, who are looking to attend GESS and build successful partnerships with schools. What would be that piece of advice? I'll come to you first, Dan.
I think it's just it's just coming back to listening. Really simple bit of advice, but in practice sometimes a little bit more difficult to do. So I think it's to your point, Phil, it's not expecting to necessarily get any commercial ROI from GESS straight away, but go in with an idea of what your strategy is and be prepared to flex that afterwards based on what you hear. Because I guarantee you those leads will turn into relationships if you can do that. So I think just listening is the first thing. Don't necessarily come in with a pitch. Try and schedule some time with the people that you want to meet ahead of GESS. Go in without any preconceptions, but having done some research, listen, and then use that to inform the strategy that you take with each potential client after that as well.
Great advice. Thanks, Dan and Phil.
Yeah, I echo all of that. Fully agree, Dan. And it's about those relationships. So again, relevance, relationships, resilience, and that comes within the long-term strategy. And an event like GESS is kind of one of the anchors of that strategy. It's where you meet. It's where you keep the relationships going. One thing I would say around events in region, breaks my heart when I see on LinkedIn, great to visit the UAE again, see you next year or see you soon. And it just breaks, I'm always thinking, don't leave, right?
Yeah.
You have to maintain a presence here and keep nurturing the relationships. You have to be in the schools next week having those conversations, if possible.
Yeah, follow up and build on those relationships and keep them warm. Well, can I thank you both for joining me today? It was a really great session, and thank you for sharing your experience and expertise on the panel. And thank you everyone for joining us. I'll hand back to you now, Millie.
Thanks, Rachel, and thank you to all three of you for sharing your expert insights on the international schools market and the GCC. It's a really, really interesting discussion, and a massive thank you to our audience for tuning in as well. See, I've seen a couple of questions come through about GESS Dubai, and we've been chatting about it as well. We'll come round very quickly. As soon as school starts, it will whiz round to November. So I'm just going to put a pop-up on your screen. So yeah, obviously there is still time to exhibit. I know someone's asked about that. So this will take you straight to our contact us page, or alternatively you can email sales@gesseducation.com, secure your spot, chat to the team, and yeah, take a look there. There will be a recording of the session available as well. We'll pop it up onto the GESS Education YouTube channel, as well as the GESS Education website, and that will be emailed round to everyone that's attended as well. Once the webinar has ended, please do take a moment to share your feedback. You'll have a survey just pop up at the end of the webinar. But other than that, it's just to say a massive thank you again to the audience and the panel for today's discussion. And obviously we're hopefully going to see a lot of you at GESS Dubai as well. So take care and goodbye for now.
Thanks
all. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Do you want a copy of the slides, Millie?
Oh, yes, please. It's going to cut off in 2 seconds.